Larry Stransky.
Yes.
Richie Wasserman.
Here.
Tess Albin-Smith.
Here.
Michael Carter.
Here.
John Housecheck.
Here.
Jack Rexman. Sorry, Rex Jackman. I'm sorry.
I'm here.
Your name always stumps me. And Chair Dan Jurdy.
Here. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so that's call to order. And then we have presentation and discussion for board orientation overview of MCOG programs.
All right. So we wanted to do a little board orientation today. Hopefully this will be fairly brief. We haven't done an orientation in several years. Board members get written material when they come onto the board, but we haven't done an actual presentation in a while. And since we do have several new board members this year, we thought it would be a good time to do an orientation and an overview. This way, when things come up on MCOG agendas, you'll have some additional background about the topics that we are discussing. And we're going to divide the presentation up a little bit, so Janet will take part of the presentation and Loretta will take part of the presentation. Oh. Yeah, it doesn't stay very well. Okay. So just a little background on MCOG. We are the Regional Transportation Planning Agency for Mendocino County, which includes the 4 cities. MCOG was formed in a joint powers agreement in 1972 after the Transportation Development Act was passed. So we are both a COG and which is Council of Government, and our TPA, Regional Transportation Planning Agency. And the difference between the two is a COG is a general purpose regional agency that can undertake any topic that is of shared interest to the member agencies. Many of the COGs are formed specifically to address transportation planning, but some do take on additional responsibilities. And an RTPA is a county or multi-county agency that is charged by state planning or state law in meeting specific requirements. Those requirements include preparation of a regional transportation plan, a regional transportation improvement program, and the annual overall work program. So the JPA that governs MCOG identifies these specific powers to act as a transportation planning agency, to conduct economic development planning, and to conduct other specific powers authorized by resolution of the member agencies. Did we pass out the acronym list? Okay, we're good. Okay, great. So we actually we updated our acronym list because we do so enjoy our acronyms. We've got a cheat sheet of all of the acronyms that we use. So we're going to go ahead. It's in your orientation materials, but we went ahead and made hard copies of the acronym list so that you have that for today's presentation. So in 2010, MCOG board held a planning workshop, a board planning workshop, and developed this mission statement. So MCOG's mission is to provide regional, community, and intercommunity transportation planning, to administer transportation funding and financing, to represent Mendocino County's interests at higher levels of government, to develop transportation projects for future funding, to provide technical assistance for transportation project delivery, to support rural public transportation services, to administer grants for transportation community enhancement projects, and to provide a forum to facilitate discussion on other matters of regional importance. At that same workshop, the board also developed a vision and a purpose statement. And those are available on the MCOG website if you are interested in those. So the board composition. The MCOG board is made up of 2 members of the County Board of Supervisors, 1 City Council member from each of the member cities, and an elected official or public appointee appointed by the Board of Supervisors. And then a representative Caltrans sits with the MCOG board to form the Policy Advisory Committee. So MCOG officers are the chair and vice chair, which were appointed at the last meeting. And then we have 3 standing committees on which MCOG board members participate. Those are the Policy Advisory Committees, the Executive Committee, and the Transit Productivity Committee. Then there are 2 other advisory standing committees, which are made up of staff and technical people and stakeholders. Those are the Technical Advisory Committee, which has representatives from the member agencies and other stakeholder agencies, and there are Social Services Transportation Advisory Council. In addition to acting as the COG and Regional Transportation Planning Agency, the MCOG Board of Directors also serves as the Service Authority for Freeway Emergencies of Mendocino County, which is the agency that administers the call box program throughout the county. That program is funded through a $1 annual fee charged by the DMV on vehicles registered in Mendocino County. Responsibilities in the SAFE program include planning, installation, monitoring and maintenance, monthly service fees for the call box system. That system includes 45 satellite call boxes and 96 standard cellular call boxes. The SAFE board meets as needed, so you'll periodically see a SAFE meeting listed on your MCOG agenda, but it would be at the regular time of the MCOG meeting. So MCOG staffing is provided by contract. Down Associates provides the administration and fiscal services, as well as SAFE administration, and Davy Bates Consulting provides planning services and SAFE planning and operations. So the overall responsibilities of MCOG can be grouped into these categories: fiscal oversight and allocations, transportation policy development, advocacy, management of the State Transportation Improvement Program, transportation planning, and special projects. An example of these special projects is the Covelo multi-use trail that we are currently administering. So I'm going to turn the presentation over to Janet now to talk about fiscal oversight and allocations.
All right, we do spend a lot of time on that. Starting with the Transportation Development Act, we call that TDA. This is this big document the state puts together. It's got all the codes, public utilities codes and statutes that govern the Transportation Development Act. And it is our job to administer that in Mendocino County. So there are 2 funding sources in TDA, and those are the Local Transportation Fund, and that is the quarter-cent local sales tax that we collect in the county, and the State Transit Assistance, and that is a fund that comes from gas taxes generally, and that is administered by the state, and we're given an allocation every quarter, or actually an estimate every year, and we get quarterly allocations out of that. So those are the 2 funds. When I talk about the budget, you will hear more about that, about how we use those kinds of funds. And I can get into more detail as you wish. This budget that some of you have seen every year so far, some of you may not have seen this, is what we put together with all the background. It lays out the allocations for the Local Transportation Fund, State Transit Assistance, and all the other sources that we use. And we'll be getting into that more in the coming months. In fact, on today's agenda, I will be talking a little bit about the first draft of that new budget. So other than that, so there's the budgets. We pay the bills, the claims, we call those, invoices for the different allocations that you've made under that budget. So those are, MTA would be the biggest claimant. Your jurisdictions, the cities and the county, get various payments and allocations out of this. And who else am I not thinking of? Sometimes we have our consultants that are under planning, our planning work elements. We hire consultants, so we're paying those bills. And any other partners, sometimes we have some nonprofits, people that work with us on projects. So we keep the cash flow moving along, various reporting that I've got to do. I have to do a lot of that for the fiscal audit. Every year we have a fiscal audit, and that is by law in this Transportation Development Act. It is also written into our Joint Powers Agreement. It says we have to have an audit every year. TDA audits are to audit those funds that are within that act, and the Joint Powers Agreement says we have to audit all of our funds. So I have 15 different fund accounts that I'm managing. And the other thing is a triennial performance audit. So that's also in TDA. It says every 3 years we've got to have a performance audit. We go out to bid, look for a consultant, an expert in this kind of these matters that's familiar with the kind of work we're supposed to be doing, and we get that audit. We're in the middle of one of those right now. We just kicked off another performance audit, and you will get that report in at our June meeting. That's generally what's under TDA. Public transit is also really the main subject of the Transportation Development Act. You know, aside from administration and planning and a small amount for bike and ped projects, mostly this is governing public transit. So we have oversight of Mendocino Transit Authority, and you know, we have performance standards and various data we have to collect from them to make sure that they're spending our money wisely, the public's funds. And so that's a big part of what we do. And that would be looking at their operations. Senior center contracts come under MTA directly because they are classified as, they've been I guess, designated the Consolidated Transportation Services Agency for this county, which means they're providing all the transit. And so the assisted transit services that the senior center vans provide, that's all under contracts with MTA. So we keep a watch over that. We allocate the funds and pass that money through as they spend it. And capital reserve is the last major category there under transit. And that's where MTA is allowed to have a 5-year capital plan, and we can set aside funds from the local transportation funds or the state transit assistance, the two funds that are under this Transportation Development Act. Here, I'm trying not to use acronyms here. So. A lot more syllables. But in any case, we're allowed to set aside a 5-year reserve for them. And that's up to how MTA wants to spend it. This board will approve it. Our transit committee takes a look at that. But that's what the capital reserve is. And it's not going to be a whole lot of money, but it's local funds that they can match with federal grants, other larger sources that they have access to. So that's public transit. Does anybody have any questions on the way, or should we wait until the end? Okay. Keep your questions in mind if we want to come to that later. And then the last major fiscal category that I've got under my watch here is the Regional Surface Transportation Program, RSTP. And I think we're coming on the next slide or so to the 3 different programs under that funding source that MCOG has elected by policy to manage. So I'll get to those in a moment. And the other, pardon me?
Are we to advance the slide?
Yes, so I'm done with that one. We do have other funds. Loretta's going to talk about the planning funding sources. I want to come to that. But those are the major ones that administration is involved with. Okay.
I have a small question.
Yes.
So you don't get involved in any of the school issues?
We
no
don't.
School bus?
No. School buses are a different thing entirely.
Right,
yeah. I don't know a whole lot about it, but it's not under the public transit rules that we have. I think they're not required to provide transportation, But, you know, I'm sure many of you know so much more about this than I do. My understanding is that the schools get their money through attendance, isn't that right? And so you want to get your kids to school, and so that's why you have school buses. In a nutshell, that's how I understand
I'm
it.
just curious,
Yeah.
with the fire evacuations, the school buses were used? How did that work?
I do
Was
not
that
know.
coordination with this agency?
So
Not with us.
yeah, so we do not have any involvement with the school district transportation programs. I believe when I know the Ukiah Unified bus drivers helped evacuate the jail inmates from Lakeport during the fires this last year. But I believe that was just coordination. Somebody reached out to the school district, and bus drivers really stepped up and helped out.
So MCOG was not involved?
We were not involved.
I can answer your question.
Okay.
The Sheriff's Office of Emergency Services put in a request to the Mendocino Office of Education for those buses to be used for emergency purposes.
Thank you.
Good question.
So-
We're all learning something today.
Yeah, and that is the kind of thing, if the climate change adaptation grant that we have applied for fire emergency evacuation planning and preparedness, it would look into sort of formalizing some of those
Agreements,
arrangements. Yeah.
Which is a good idea.
Very good.
Thank you.
All right, we are on unmet transit needs process, and that's something that we do every year. Some of you have been through this. We had this on our agenda last month in February. Usually in December or February, we will have a public hearing. The thing that, I guess I'm getting ahead of myself into steps. It happens every year. We have a procedure. We have stakeholder input. But that, again, is something that comes out of this act, the TDA. And it has to be done if we were to use any of our local transportation fund, the sales tax on streets and roads. That would be the very last category. You have to make sure there are no transit needs left to meet before you start using this money for local streets and roads. So it's been, I think, 20 years or more since we've actually used any of the local funds for streets and roads from the sales tax. This body has created policies to where we don't even do that. We've decided it's better to use other kinds of funds for streets and roads purposes. So really, we are not using it for that. But we continue to do this annual process for other reasons. We feel that it's a good way to get stakeholder input, public input, and to find out what the community's priorities are for public transit, what the needs are. And that, again, kind of folds into, it's all part of our transit oversight role and trying to get the most out of the money. So we do this process. There are a couple definitions of what is an unmet transit need and what is reasonable to meet. I think we talked about that a little maybe last month, and I brought my packet along. We did have everything in that. If you looked at last month's packet in your spare time, if you're interested in delving into this, something to study, right? You do have a lot of information in the February packet that we just had. And that talks about the definitions. We actually came up with a list that we put before you that is now accepted as testimony. Now it's going to be analyzed and go through some committees. So I think it's time to talk about the steps very briefly, how this starts off in the fall. The Social Services Transportation Advisory Council gets together. We convene that meeting. They come up with all the needs that their constituents have thought about, and they bring those forward. We compile this list. We don't try to screen it. We don't try to analyze it or see if they meet the definition at that point. We're just collecting a lot of needs. That happens in the fall. And then what you just did last month is we have the public hearing and determine if those appear to be actually unmet transit needs that warrant further analysis. Those are now being sent to MTA. And Mendocino Transit Authority Management will now look those over and do some things like cost analysis, kind of do a first cut of priorities and see are they even feasible. And then bring that back to our transit committee. And a couple of you just got appointed to that last month. Jim Brown, I believe, Director Brown, I think you were appointed to it, and Director Carter. So we'll be convening that meeting pretty soon in the spring. We're looking to have a meeting in March, actually, late March or early April. Okay, so now it's been through all the committees, comes back to this board in time for the budget. And you would make a finding then in June of whether any of those needs are reasonable to meet. And by that time, a handful of those are rising to the top of the list and are recommended by your committees. The Social Services Committee also weighs in on that. You have plenty of people recommending to you on what would be reasonable. That goes into our budget document, and more often than not, there aren't really any more funds available. But oftentimes there are other avenues, a route adjustment perhaps that can go off and pick up another stop on the way, some kind of deviation or maybe a grant that can be applied for. So those are generally what we do about unmet transit needs. Any questions?
When is the budget?
Pardon me?
When is the budget adopted?
It is adopted on the first Monday in June. In May, at our May meeting, we'll have a budget workshop and we'll talk about what's in the budget, kind of get you familiarized with all the aspects of that. Plenty of time to ask questions, all that kind of thing. And then in June, it comes back to you for adoption.
And it actually, there is an item on today's agenda that sort of starts the process, not an action item, but a discussion that came out of the executive committee meeting.
Yeah, we like to report out a committee what we got so far. And now we are on the Regional Surface Transportation Program, one of our major funding sources. This comes from the federal transportation bill. We have the opportunity to exchange that federal money for state funds, which are a lot easier for small agencies to deal with. So we always opt to do that. So it's administered by Caltrans in that case. So we just get an allocation. We get a regional apportionment and do what we can with that. And I think that's been running around $600,000, $700,000 a year lately. And we have accumulated some funds in that. We've got, I don't want to give you a number, it's over $2 million at this point. And I'll tell you what's in it. In the budget, by policy, we've had a $100,000 a year allocation to the partnership funding program. And the partnership program is meant to fund projects that maybe cross jurisdictional boundaries, or maybe no one entity is responsible for it, or nobody has enough funds by themselves to do it. The first example of that kind of project that we did do was the Simpson Lane roundabout over outside of Fort Bragg. And that was, it costed something over $1 million. And we put in $200,000. And the county put in some money, and Caltrans put in most of the money. So between us three agencies, we were able to actually build that first roundabout on a state highway in this county. And that solved some problems over there, and was good use of the funds. Other things, we've done some smaller things with that. Trying to think what, I think we put some funds into that Laytonville pedestrian bridge, possibly.
Possibly.
Yeah, we did do that.
That
you know why I remember
had so
that?
many different funding sources.
That had a lot of different funds. The pedestrian bridge up in Laytonville,
So it was a county
that
project.
we recently finished.
Yeah, just recently finished. We toured the project in November, so before you came on the board. But it was on Branscombe Road, and it was alongside the vehicle bridge. There was a rickety old wooden pedestrian bridge, and so they put in a nice prefabricated bridge alongside.
Much safer. Yeah.
So
Do we do, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Do we do things like, do pedestrian pathways along the highways and drain those and all that?
Various funding sources for that. This is kind of targeted to specific things, but that's really kind of endless need. I mean, yeah, I think that could wipe out just about any funds you have. We're very careful with the partnership program. We don't have that much money in it. And so,
So the Laytonville project, there was a series of grants that created a pedestrian trail alongside the county road from the schools. I don't know if they had Safe Routes to School funds in the past, but anyway, so there was a good network of trail, except for this one spot where the bridge had to be replaced.
that's a really good point. That is why we spent so much money on it and scraped together all the funds we could to get that done, because it connected up so many other investments that had already been made. And there was funding from the state that we would have lost if we hadn't finished that project. It would have gone back to the state. A bunch of reasons, yeah, we wanted to link everything up, and so it was a strategic investment. That's the kind of thing we try to do with the partnership program. Moving on.
Let me
Yeah?
just.
Okay.
So not part of any of the RSTP program so far, but there is another project regarding pedestrian facilities alongside highways. The special project that I mentioned at the start of the presentation, the Covelo multi-use trail, that is something that we are implementing, and it will be a pedestrian and bicycle trail that parallels Route 162 through Covelo. Where currently people have to walk.
Oh, I saw that
in,
on the video.
yes, last
Yeah.
month. So, and of course, drainage will be part of that design of that project. So, just an example of that type of project, but not necessarily through this particular program.
Okay.
Yeah, you really have to target carefully where the needs are. The middle one, the second one out of the three programs in the Regional Surface Transportation Program is Regional Project Management and for the purpose of local assistance. This was started in 2010 or 11 when we had that board strategic planning workshop, and decided it would be helpful to have a staff person who could do some work to assist the local agency staffs, the city and county staffs, with things that might not get done otherwise or just needed some extra attention. I think we just want to make sure that when we do planning, those plans don't just sit on the shelf and stay there, that they're actually going to move forward and get positioned to actually build something. And that was sort of the idea behind that. Right now, we have a vacancy in that spot, but we do have some funds in there that we segregate these programs and keep track of what's in each of these pots of funds. And we do have some funds for local assistance, also some direct costs, maybe engineered cost estimates, maybe something like that for projects that our entities are doing. I think, here's an example. The project over at one of the schools in Ukiah, we have a traffic study.
Yes, the City of Ukiah and Ukiah Unified School District came to us to partner in funding for a traffic study in the area of this building, but that would impacts 3 different schools, and then county government, and so they wanted to look at the traffic patterns in this area. So that's something that we use that particular funding source to help fund.
Yeah, resolving a bottleneck there. So just an example of the kind of thing we've used the money for, besides the staff position.
So I have a question on that.
Yeah.
maybe it's been a brilliant decision to fund this position, and maybe not. Maybe this would be a good time just to take that back to the technical advisory committee, because the mostly public works directors from the other agencies, just to see how's that working for them. Do they really, given the limited amount of funds available, do they feel like that's a high priority to continue funding that position?
So that would be something, I don't feel like we can get into that discussion today.
We'll
but
make
it's something
note of
that-
it, yeah. Something we could take a look at. And, we have a budget coming, and you can decide, do you want to set aside those funds this coming year for that? Okay. All right, and then the biggest portion, the lion's share of this pot of funds is going out by formula to your jurisdiction. So we've got a formula here in the budget. Maybe I could just take a look at that and remind us of what that formula is. And you know what? I'm not sure if it's actually in the budget resolution. But the point is, each of the cities and the county get just a flat amount. There's a base rate. I think there's $50,000. Make sure Point Arena gets some of that. And then the rest, I think, is on road miles. So there is a formula for that. Say the largest one is going to Ukiah. And then that's the largest portion, then followed by the counties getting around 100,000 or a little bit over that every year. And then the cities are getting something under that every year. Maybe around 70,000 or so, I want to say. So that is not a lot of money, but it is the most flexible funding that we have. So this is very valuable to our member agencies, because you can do almost anything that's transportation related with those funds. And it's very useful for matching other kinds of funds, I guess, or just paving your, filling your potholes. And that's often what it's used for. So I think we've had some little more creative things. Recently, Willits and Fort Bragg have wanted street sweepers. We did some research to see if that was eligible. Yes, it was. So they now have new street sweepers. So these are very flexible funds. And, some of the entities, the county claims theirs every year. Some save up a long time. Ukiah has over $1 million sitting in that fund that we're holding on to until you claim it. So I'm looking at Director Brown. And I think I just had an inquiry from Public Works staff about the process of claiming that. I think they're getting ready to claim that. So I know you have big projects that this very likely is one of your major funding sources for that. So, it may sit in our fund until the city's ready to claim it. It may get claimed every year. In any case, we track all that through and make sure you get your money. Anything, questions on that RSDP program? I'll move on. The next thing down is the 2% of the local transportation funds every year in our budget can go to bike and ped facilities. It's not a lot of money. It's about, this year it's around 67,000, I think. So it is useful for matching, say, a state grant, other monies, just pooling your funds. We usually go 2 years and allocate every 2 years just to have a little bit bigger pot. I think last time we allocated out 130,000, and that was worth doing something with. And something else they're competitive, right? So the call goes out to our technical advisory committee. So those are your staff people, those are your planners and public works people, and they're going to apply to MCOG for a project for those funds, and the technical advisory committee will recommend on that, review and recommend. Actually, they're looking at each other's projects, so they try to be fair and score and rank those properly, and then it comes to this body for an allocation. So those are competitive. Those are actually small grants that MCOG awards to our own members. Anybody else eligible for that, Loretta? Is it just the cities and county?
Cities
I
and
think
counties.
so, yeah.
MTA has in the past rarely had a project.
For bike and ped, yeah, it
Right.
would be unusual. So those are the kinds of things that are kind of competed for internally here in these
May I ask
5
when that grant
agencies.
period is?
Loretta, when do we do that? I think we try to save up 2 cycles
Right.
worth and put it out same
We will be putting
timeline
it
as.
out this summer after the budget.
It often happens concurrently with our state transportation improvement program application cycle, which is
Yeah.
in the fall typically.
Try to group up those cycles, you know, so we're not having to do it too often.
Janet,
Yeah.
so when you were talking about the funding by formula to the counties and cities, that, say you said the county gets about $100,000, and then that money could be either put into the Department of Transportation budget, or you can do some creative funding with that.
Yes, there's a lot of things you could do with it. I think your Department of Transportation is mainly just trying to pave roads with it, bit by bit. So it's going into the road fund as far as I know.
So is there anything special about that money that you could use it for really special projects?
You might want to use it for things you can't find other money for, you know, for transportation.
It's the uses of that funding are dictated by Article 19 of, what is it, the government code?
The California Constitution, Article 19, yeah.
Um,
And it's pretty broad.
It is pretty broad, so you can use it for cleaning culverts, filling potholes, sanding for ice, you know, any number of things.
Cannot buy transit buses with it.
Yes, cannot buy transit buses.
It seems like Fort Bragg might have done something with your green alleys. I have something in my memory about that. Yeah, so we could talk more about that outside the meeting if you want to look into that some more.
Okay,
Or
thank
talk
you.
to your director of transportation as well. We can definitely look into that. I can give you some other ideas. And finally, we have several sources of planning funds. And are we going to get into that with the planning program? And
Yes.
Loretta can
Yes,
talk
we will
about
elaborate
those.
on
There are
that.
several different sources that come down through Caltrans typically. So that's pretty much it. That's the cash that flows through our accounts. I'm tracking 15 different fund accounts for all of these things. And the next slide is going to go into the State Transportation Improvement Program that Nafili will talk about, but that is not money that comes into our accounts. That is programming. She'll talk about that. So I think I've pretty much covered the funding programs. That's right, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so as Janet mentioned, another funding program that we administer, although it does not actually flow through our accounts with the exception of the planning, programming, and monitoring funding, is the State Transportation Improvement Program funding. So this is a capital program for transportation projects. A fund estimate is released by the state every odd year, and that identifies available funding for each region through this program. Statewide, Caltrans gets 25% of the funds available in the STIP program, and the regions get 75% of the funds available in this program. Included in the fund estimate is an amount of planning, programming, and monitoring funds. Those are funds that go into our annual planning work program, and that is for planning for, just as the name indicates, planning for programming and monitoring and basic overall management of those STIP funds. So the way that we program the funds that are identified for our region in the STIP is through our Regional Transportation Improvement Program, or RTIP. We develop the RTIP every odd-numbered year. MCOG, the MCOG board ultimately adopts that document. Typically that's done in December. It is due to the state December 15th, so we adopt it at the beginning of December and submit it. We try to get it in front of the MCOG board 2 times though, so you get a draft in November and then a final in December. So that program's available, STIP funding for the region. It may and sometimes does include future STIP funding commitments. Funds are awarded through a local competitive application process that uses criteria that's been adopted by MCOG. It includes an evaluation for consistency with our regional transportation plan, which I will tell you more about later in the presentation. The draft is developed by staff and the technical advisory committee who score the applications. Then the draft is presented to the MCOG board, which adopts the document. Then it goes to Caltrans and gets programmed as part of the State Transportation Improvement Program, which is adopted by the state in the spring of every even year. So we will begin talking about the 2020 STIP at the end of this summer of this year. That's when we'll get the fund estimate and begin that conversation and start working with our local agencies. Then throughout, in the intervening years between STIP cycles, we have ongoing management of projects, which include allocations for funding, because as I mentioned, we do not get those funds directly. We program the funds, and then the local agencies have to submit requests to actually have the funds released, and that's done on a reimbursable basis from the state. Then we also do things like extensions because things are programmed for specific years, so extensions, amendments, and various management of those funds. And the funds are programmed over a 5-year period. Every time we get new funding, it's typically in the outer 2 years of that 5-year period. And the amounts that are available for the region through this program vary widely. Passage of SB1 has hopefully stabilized that. In the last STIP cycle, we had roughly $7.5 million available for the region. We expect that will increase in this next STIP cycle, and then we'll continue to see steady increase and stability in that program. There have been years when we've had no money available, and there was one year, the 2016 STIP, in which they had a negative fund estimate statewide, and we had to delete some of the projects that we had programmed. So we hope that those years are behind us, and we will be able to keep project moving forward at this point. Just a couple examples of projects from the STIP are the City of Ukiah's State Street Road Diet, the Downtown Streetscape Project and Road Diet. And the City of Fort Bragg has a bicycle and pedestrian project on South Main Street coming up. So those are just a couple examples of projects that are funded through that program. And now we will get into a discussion of planning, and Loretta will take over this part.
Yes, one of the main programs under MCOG is our annual Transportation Planning Work Program, most often referred to as the Overall Work Program, or the OWP. This is an annual program funded by various state and federal funding sources, local transportation funds, LTF, Rural Planning Assistance Funds, RPA, and planning, programming, and monitoring are the main funding sources, and then often we have state and federal grants. So the projects in the work program are called work elements, and they must be consistent with our regional transportation plan. A typical work program, the current year has 20 work elements or 20 projects, And eligible participants are MCOG, the cities and the county, and MTA. The TAC reviews and recommends the draft work program, which we send to Caltrans by March 1st. So that's been submitted last week. And then Caltrans will review it and comment on it. We will make any needed adjustments and take it back to the TAC and then present it to the MCOG board for approval during the budget process. Management of the work program includes a significant amount of reporting and tracking and processing of invoices and routine things like that. And you will see in today's information packet, there's a quarterly report. So if you're ever curious about what's going on in the annual work program, you can look for that report and it will give the status of the various projects. There's a 6-week application cycle for local agencies to request projects. That runs from October 15th through December 1. And we just send out, it's a fairly informal solicitation, and the cities and counties just fill out a 1- or 2-page application, and that gets that program started. Some examples of work elements in the annual work program. We have work elements that appear every year. They're MCOG staff elements, such as the examples I listed, the regional government and intergovernmental coordination. That's just ongoing day-to-day work with local agencies and the state. Planning, programming, and monitoring, that's the element Nafili mentioned that's funded with PPM funds from the STIP. And it includes activities related to the RTIP and STIP and CTC, although we do have some broad authority to use that for other work elements that are related to the Regional Transportation Plan. For the last several years, we've had a training work element that provides training funds to local agencies and MCOG staff for transportation-related training. And then we also annually have a multimodal transportation planning work element that includes planning for bike and ped and transit and rail and all transportation modes. This would include things like monitoring the NCRA and MTA issues and things of that nature. And then another annual element that the County Department of Transportation has is for combined special studies. They do a variety of local studies, traffic surveys, and speed zone studies on the county-maintained road system. In addition, they will do requests from the cities for traffic surveys or traffic counts as requested. Some additional examples of work elements that are not annual but are periodic would be updating the pavement management program. Ideally, it's a triennial update. There has been a time or two that it's been extended to 4 years if we're short on funding, but that's a periodic update. And the Regional Transportation Plan update is every 4 years. Some examples of local agency projects. The City of Ukiah has a comprehensive ADA access plan update in the current work program. The City of Fort Bragg has a street safety plan project. The County Department of Transportation received a Caltrans grant for the Orchard Avenue Extension feasibility study, but the local match portion that's needed to match that grant is funded through the work program. And then in the current work program, MTA has a project for a transit designs guidelines manual. And then I just listed a couple examples of some grant-funded projects. In the current work program, we have the Pedestrian Facility Needs Inventory project. It's an inland and north coast study. That was funded by a grant. We also had the south coast portion of the same project, but it was funded in the work program with other funds without the grant. Then another example of a recent grant project was the Hopland Main Street Corridor Engineered Feasibility Study that happened in 2015. Okay, and now I'll go on to grant assistance unless you have any questions about the work program. Okay. So under the grant assistance, this is a work element in the work program, work element 20, that's been in the work program for several years. It's funding for MCOG staff to help local agencies with every aspect of grant application or research or technical assistance. So I listed a few bullet points to research and provide information to local agencies on upcoming grant opportunities, to attend grant workshops and webinars, to educate ourselves and inform local agencies, to review and comment on various grant program guidelines that Caltrans will distribute and invite comment on. And for MCOG-sponsored grants, we will actually be the grant applicant, will prepare the application, and if funded, administer the project. And that will include everything from doing a competitive procurement process, developing an RFP and hiring a consultant and managing the grant. And then if it's for a local agency grant, we can do as much as needed, as much as the local agency would like us to help with, provide assistance, help with applications, provide the local match if they request it to put in the work program. We will present that to the TAC and to the board if that's requested, and participate on project development teams. There are many grant programs. I did not list them all. I listed some of the current ones we're dealing with, including the Active Transportation Program, ATP. Under Caltrans planning grants, the Adaptation Planning and Sustainable Community grants are the two that we've recently applied for. There are several grant programs under the SB1 program, Urban Greening grants, Highway Safety Improvement Program, HSIP grants, Environmental Enhancement and Mitigation. Those are just some of the current ones, some of the ones that that come up regularly. There are more than this. Last week I received information that there was money available to the counties and cities on some park bonds, so I passed those types of things along. I often get information on things on climate change from the Strategic Growth Council. We pass all that along to the local agencies that may not be receiving that information. I think that's it. Thank you.
So Loretta, often these planning projects are the first step to actually develop something that will be built down the line, you know, some kind of a project.
Right.
You must have a plan, right?
Right.
To start things off.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. So several-
Ukiah's Downtown Streetscape
Right.
project is a great example. That was in our work program
Yes.
many years ago, that initial plan that identified the concepts in the project.
Yes, and another current example is the Hopland study that we did for the Main Street corridor. Now Nafili's working with Caltrans to implement some of the recommendations in that grant.
so, you know, something like those community-based planning projects will get stakeholders involved and do kind of an inventory of what projects are needed, and then prioritize those so that you get positioned for funding when it becomes available to actually build something.
Yes.
So,
Go ahead.
Can I ask the process? I'm new, so I don't really understand the process. Does it usually come from the city transportation person or the city manager, the application for these grants?
Well,
It wouldn't come from a person like a city council, one per city per council
Well,
person.
we keep your local staff informed. They sit on our technical advisory committee, which is comprised of the local city public works people and some planning people. So that would be the first one that we would, you know, spread the word to, that the funds are available, or that the grant programs are available.
So
So
if there
it would
was
be
something-
your technical staff, your public
Yeah.
works staff.
So staff works with staff?
Yes.
Yeah, gotcha.
Yes.
and we try to put this on our board agenda too, under reports when they're coming up, so that you can know there are some funds available that maybe your staff is looking at applying for. So,
But projects, not just grant applications, but funding in the work program in general, those applications would come from staff. So if an elected official were interested in something, they could work with local agency staff.
or depending on your city, maybe staff has to go to get your council approval to apply, or maybe when it comes, if you actually get an award, maybe then you're accepting those funds or
I
something
could
like
see the city council saying this is what we want to do
Yes.
that. Right.
and directing the staff, but in the actual application would be staff to staff.
Yes.
Correct?
Yeah.
All right.
If I could just go a little bit,
Yes.
what's interesting to me is that, that, you know, the focus is, okay, should we be spending as much money on planning? But on the other hand, it's this pursuit of the funds that actually result in a lot of projects being built in Mendocino County. And, we had a recent discussion at a recent Board of Supervisors meeting about the broadband and how it's been something that gets discussed, and the private companies deploy a little bit of improvement here and there, but it doesn't seem like there's tremendous progress on that front. Mm-hmm. And I think, in contrast, I think there hasn't been a lot of local money to pay for people to really push those projects along. So currently, it's Economic Development Finance Corporation has been tasked as a small part of their job is to try to coordinate those efforts to bring in some grants and attract private investment into providing high-speed internet in areas that don't have it. But it's very small scale compared to what happens on the transportation side in terms of funding for staff to pursue grants.
Right.
Well, actually, prepare the planning document first that you have then to then go and pursue a grant. So. Anyway, I just think that broadband has moved slower maybe than it would have if there had been more staff behind it to push it along. Instead of, I think historically there's been staff to organize meetings to talk about broadband, but not a lot of staff to actually prepare applications up until maybe now.
Okay, so since we're on the topic of plans, the major transportation planning document for MCOG is our Regional Transportation Plan. This is adopted now every 4 years. We used to adopt an RTP every 5 years. It is a multimodal plan, so it includes streets, roads, highways, bicycle, pedestrian, transit. We also include elements for rail, maritime, tribal transportation. So it encompasses all modes of transportation in Mendocino County. It includes goals and policies for transportation, a discussion of needs in all of those various modes, and recommended actions or projects in the various modes of transportation. Development of the RTP involves MCOG staff, local agency staff, our technical advisory committee, other stakeholders. We also do a significant public outreach during development of the RTP, and this is because it's the main opportunity for public involvement in the transportation planning process in general, because we often have to then make the finding that other things are consistent with that RTP. So the public gets input into the RTP, and then other plans and activities are consistent with that RTP. The MCOG board, of course, is involved in adoption of the RTP as well, and ultimately, or involved in development of the RTP, and ultimately responsible for adoption of the RTP. The last RTP was adopted in February of last year, and so we will start on the next update in fiscal year 2021. So that'll be the next opportunity for updating that plan and that kind of involvement. So some other plans, some of these have already been mentioned, but other plans that MCOG has, and I want to mention that most of these are available on our MCOG website. If you want more information, it's a new website, so some things are still being added, but hopefully many of these are on there. So we've got our active transportation plan, which was adopted in 2017, Safe Routes to Schools plan, the Zero Emission Vehicle Regional Readiness Plan, and various community and corridor plans. So these, some of the plans that Loretta mentioned are examples of these. The Rails with Trails plan is another example of community and corridor plan. So again, those are available on our MCOG website if you would like to see those.
Or if there's one that's not up there yet, let me know, and
Yes.
I'll dig it out for you.
Yes.
Hopefully
Let's
get it
see, I have a
posted.
question.
Yes.
So with the regional transportation plan, is that where you have the list of prioritized projects going on?
We do have a list of projects in the regional transportation plan. They are prioritized to the extent that we have them in a short-range plan and a long-range plan, which is typically 1 to 10 years out, and then 10 to 20 years out. So we do identify projects in those two time frames.
And they're the priorities of the agencies, right?
Well, they are not necessarily.
When you mean prioritize, do you mean like next in line for funding?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and it's also a fiscally
They have
constrained
to compete.
document. Not everything possible is going to be in there.
Yes, but
The ones
so we,
that, how does that work?
The priority is not, it's not like this is priority number 1, priority number 2, priority number 3. Often things get funded, even if you had established a priority like that, things often do not get funded that way because you fund things as money that is the right fit for a project becomes available. So say you have bicycle and pedestrian, several bicycle and pedestrian projects that an agency would like to implement. But there's one of those bicycle and pedestrian projects that has an accident history. So that project might be more competitive for funding than others, and so you apply for funding because you know it's going to be more competitive and you're successful in securing that funding, and then the project gets built. So even when priorities are established, because funding comes from a variety of sources, they don't necessarily get implemented in that order. But the RTP doesn't really establish like a numbered priority. It's more just short-term and long-term. And often, even if a project is considered a high priority or of high importance, it's not going to be in that short-term project category just because of the amount of lead time that's involved in developing some large-scale projects, or the amount of time needed to secure funding for projects that are large-scale. So there are a lot of things that that affect, you know, how things get listed in the RTP. Does that
Yeah.
answer
But
that?
essentially, you are trying to cover most of those priorities of the member agencies, right? And
Well, the projects
So
in the
that when-
RTP reflect the priorities of member agencies. They reflect public input, stakeholder input, board member input. So a lot of different things go into establishing the projects in the plan.
but just going back to, you know, when you go after a grant or something like that, and it should be consistent with your regional transportation plan, you want those projects to be in your regional transportation plan. So that's why, you know, you're really trying to bring everything in you can,
Yes.
right? So that that's laying the groundwork for when money comes along. You can say it's in your regional transportation plan and it's consistent.
Well, I guess
It
the
all
question,
ties.
the question is basically goes back to the Sherwood Road second access route. And I've heard that it was at the top of the list and then it got moved down.
So the way that the brook trails, the need for a second access to the brook trails area is addressed in the plan, it is established as a, you know, a strong need, but it's an unfunded need at this point. So I can't remember exactly the title that's used, but there is a section of the RTP that talks about a few large-scale projects in the county, including that project, that, you know, there's this clear identified need, but not a clear plan for funding them at this point due to the magnitude of all of those projects. Not just the magnitude in terms of funding, but also in terms of other project development obstacles that maybe have been identified. So,
I think part of the issue was because there was a property owner, now maybe they've changed their position, but there was a property owner who I think you've probably spoken to, who, at least at the time, was threatening to sue the county or MCOG or anybody if they wanted to pursue a road through his property. And so if that's changed, if that's not the case, then the circumstances for that project would be changed.
That particular circumstance would have changed, yes. So even though the project isn't listed in, here's our action plan, because we can't really say this is a planned action when we don't have a realistic expectation of funding or overcoming other obstacles, it is identified as a need in the plan. So,
Okay, thank you.
you're welcome. Okay, so the last plan that I will mention is our Regional Housing Needs Plan. This is a plan that was last adopted in August of 2018, and we won't have to update it for 8 years. The Regional Housing Needs Plan is the end of the Regional Housing Needs Assessment process. This is a process that we go through. We get a total number of needed housing units in our region from the State Department of Housing and Community Development. They give us numbers for each various income categories that are needed, and then we go through a process of distributing those housing units among the local agencies. So each of the cities and the county get a number of housing units in each income category. The MCOG board adopts that plan ultimately, and the local agencies then take those numbers and use them to develop their housing elements. This used to be done every 5 years, but a few years ago we took action to, under an allowance in SB 375, which enabled aligning of the regional housing needs assessment with the regional transportation plan. Because of the link between housing and transportation, we were able to move to an 8-year update cycle, but that meant that our RTP update cycle had to go from 5 years to 4 years. So every other RTP, we will then be going through a regional housing needs assessment. Are there any questions on that? Or any questions in general, because we're at the end of our orientation. So I do want to mention that there is additional background material and information in the orientation that you may have been or will be provided on a flash drive today. And those are, if you would like, they can be made available to you a hard copy as well. So if you are interested in a hard copy, just let us know. Otherwise, you will have the information electronically.
Just to tack on a couple other thoughts, just underlying all these responsibilities, we do spend a lot of time on, our community relations, keeping in touch, trying to let the public know what we're doing, maintaining that website, public notices and press releases and things like that. We've got to keep on top of all the records and the policies and procedures. I don't know if we talked about any of this stuff, but this is all this kind of stuff behind the scenes that we have to do. There's a requirement for tribal government consultation at some levels, certainly with the regional transportation plan. And then something that's really been important to staff over the years is being involved statewide. And I think, you've heard Phil Dow, our former executive director, talk a lot about that, how important it is to advocate at the state level and make sure we get a good share of the resources that are available and that the state understands what rural issues are. And so, we're members of certain associations like, the California Association of Councils of Governments, CALCOG, and, making sure, our staff attends the Rural Counties Task Force. I don't think we really got into any of this, did we? But I just wanted to get that in there, that there are a lot of trips to Sacramento. There's the North State Super Region that we were involved in founding initially. That's 16 counties in the North State, you know, because we're a rural area, we don't really have the clout that the urban areas have. And so banding together with the 16 counties for the North State gives us kind of a little more critical mass to bring and push our issues. So that's a lot of the kind of things we do.
All right, are there any questions? No? Okay, so
Covered a lot of ground there.
before we move on the agenda, we would like to just very quickly take a moment to get a board photo. Alexis Pedrati, who's our on MCOG staff and our SAFE coordinator, is here today. She's also a gifted photographer and is here today with her camera to take a board photo. So,
Or you get a haircut.
So, do you think you want to just do it in front of the seal?
Yeah, let's try it in front of the seal and see how it looks, and we'll go from there. Otherwise, we can walk outside. It is still a little nice outside for the
Well,
next
the tall guys in the back?
Tall guys in the front.
Oh, the chair, yeah.
Yeah, can you?
Yeah.
Is this chair all the way?
Yeah,
tall,
please.
so behind you.
Thank you. So we discovered our website, the photos on our website are very out of date, and so.
Snuggle in there.
Want the flash?
Now it's warmed up. Couple more, and then I'll let you guys be. Ready?
Thank you, everyone.
Sell those on.
Do you need individual pictures of anybody?
No,
We should charge for that, I think.
that's fine.
By the minute.
At least. Pictures.
Okay.
This works for me.
Okay, so. You're ready to move on with
Okay,
safe?
we're all the ways on to item number 4 in our agenda.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So report on cellular phone network changes.
Yes, so we actually, I don't, do they actually need to formally?
Oh, we're convening as safe.
Convene as
Okay.
safe, yes.
Yeah, I guess.
Do you want to like?
Okay,
No,
so
I
at
don't have any
10
kind of computer.
10:48 we're convening as safe. I'm sorry, at 2:48 we're convening as safe.
It only seems like the meeting's been that long. All right. Okay, so as I mentioned, for those of you that are new, this is Alexis Pedrati. She is our SAFE coordinator and is going to talk to you about some changes that are happening with the service that runs our call box network. And then this will tie into another agenda item later on. So,
Good afternoon. Thanks for giving me a couple minutes of your time. As you mentioned, as you guys saw in the slideshow earlier, we discussed a little bit about the call box program. You guys have seen call boxes, I'm sure, along the highways in Mendocino County. Currently, there are 141 call boxes along the state highways, and as Neff previously mentioned also, there are 45 of them that are satellite and 96 of them that are standard cellular boxes. I did just want to mention that the satellite boxes here, this is one of the very few counties in the state that actually have satellite boxes, so that is really neat, and we actually operate quite a few. So I have worked with the SAFE program for over 10 years, and the cellular boxes have had only one other time where we have ran into a situation similar to this, and that is when the cellular companies switched from analog to digital. And so it caused quite the problem at that point. We worked through it, but it changes things for the boxes. They are operated off of radios, and currently we work with Verizon. We have in the past worked with US Cellular. That is another cellular provider in the area. We are currently with Verizon, and we have been notified by Verizon that as of December 31st this year, 3G service will be terminated. What that means for our call boxes is the majority, well, 96 of them will no longer work. They're currently operating off of 3G radios. So while it seemed very simple right up front, we thought our contractor went ahead, started developing some new radios that they have tried with Verizon, and they seem to think will work great. What we have found out, though, is that trying these radios in the Bay Area and in LA County works wonderful, but trying these radios up here in our area is not. And so one thing that they didn't plan for with these radios is that many of our boxes still roam off of US Cellular towers. So currently we're in a situation we need to find the percentage of our call boxes that are roaming off of these towers. We know that we have a fix for the ones that work off of Verizon's network. We are not exactly sure how it will be affected up here in our area. So there's a few things that we need to do before actually purchasing and moving forward with these radios. We do need to get an actual number of the ones that are working off of US Cellular and how we're going to handle that, because when they shut off the service for Verizon, these boxes that are roaming off of US Cellular could potentially still work. We are not sure exactly which ones those will be yet. And the ones that are working off of Verizon, we could potentially upgrade the radios. We have in the past worked with US Cellular, and unfortunately US Cellular radios are no longer available to our contractor or to the case world. The program of the call boxes no longer operate the US Cellular radios. So there are very limited amount of radios that would work for US Cellular. So we have thought about switching back to US Cellular. But unfortunately there aren't radios that will operate with US Cellular. We have currently, we're kind of at the standstill at the moment. As you can see, we have a few hurdles that we need to get over and figure out where we need to go next. We need to schedule a meeting with Verizon. We need to know what their real plan is and what that's going to look like up here, not in the Bay Area and not in LA. We need to know what that's going to look like up here. And we need to work with our contractor closely to know exactly how many call boxes we are talking about still roaming off of the US Cellular towers. And then we'll have a little bit more of an idea where we can move forward. If we're talking 10 of the 96 are only going to be affected by the US Cellular roaming, we may consider either removing them, switching them to satellites, or letting them run the service that they have and see how long it operates. So there's a few ways that we could approach it, but currently we're kind of at a standstill until I have these few meetings and be able to move forward.
So this will, when we start talking about the SAFE budget on the regular calendar, this will provide background into the need for some planning in this area. Yes?
Question? 96 phones in Mendocino County?
Mm-hmm.
Not statewide, right?
No, just in Mendocino, yeah.
And these are all along highways, California state highways,
Yes.
not small roads.
No, we don't have any county or local.
I just know with CAL FIRE that if there was no satellite available for regular phone, they would put up their own mini satellites. Have you thought about that?
They would put up their
They
own.
would, something that would reach further, you know, so that if you're in a cell dead zone and there's an evacuation area, for example, they would put up a mini, like a little mini tower, the portable mini tower.
Mhm.
And I'm just thinking, I'm wondering if that's something that you could do.
Well, I do know that right now the satellite company that we work with for our satellite boxes, it's, you know, we can get them and we can operate them wherever we'd like. However, the cost of the satellite service is extensively high. I mean, you have $46 for just having the service per box, and then you have usage on top of it. So financially, I'm not sure that the satellite service would be the best bet to replace so many of these. The satellites, we've really focused on areas that have no other options. The canyons going in Covelo, there's no other service available for these areas. So, but it could, like I said, if it comes back to be just a few that are only going to be an issue with the USIO, then it may be an option to turn them into satellites.
For our standard cellular boxes, though, the antennas that they use, they're much stronger than just a standard cell phone. So there will be places where, you know, your cell phone may not get cellular service, but the call boxes still will. So the satellites are only in areas where there is just no other option.
I've noticed them on Highway 20 on the way up, so thank you for that.
Yeah.
So,
Oh.
and they get used.
Yeah, yeah.
So we want to make sure that the system remains in place for the public when it's needed. So we'll be trying to plan to work through these issues and prioritize replacements if needed, if they can't be done all at once. The SAFE is also safe implementation of the call boxes is guided by a 5-year plan, and we're in the last year of that 5-year plan, so we'll be working on an update of that, and then these issues will be incorporated into that
Do other
plan.
counties have these?
Do other counties have just call boxes in general or satellite boxes?
Whatever.
Yes, yeah, there are many other counties around the
Judo.
state. So what we find around this area is that many of the other counties are removing call boxes, that the service is being provided in other levels down there for cellular, and that a lot of the other counties had installed them every 2 miles. For us, that's never going to be a reality, and so we've worked on implementing them as we feel necessary in the areas that the service is still not available to handheld cell phones. And so while we still look at implementing these services, a lot of them are working on removal plans. So we're kind of in a different area for the other safes.
So the other activity that Service Authority for Freeway Emergency Organizations can do, we do not here, but like in urban areas, they have freeway service patrols. So those are services that basically they're just patrols that drive along, and if there's like a fender bender or somebody breaks down or something, their purpose is just to move those people out of the way, basically, to keep traffic flowing, maybe help them contact help. So that's something that in, you know, LA County, where you don't have any cell phone dead zones, they fund those activities. And there is a statewide organization of safes that Lexi does attend. However, in recent years, their focus has been very much on removal of call boxes and more focus on the freeway service patrol, so they're not focused on rural needs at this point.
You know, we do have, areas where, you know, we still have some economic disadvantage in our county, and people most likely to break down maybe can't afford to have a newer vehicle or keeping it well maintained, or maybe those are the people that don't have cell phones, and so it's important, I think, in this county for us to maintain the system. That's what we're seeing. So,
Richie?
I'm not a tech person, but is the rollout of 5G going to mean that we're going to have to go through this again in a year or two?
I am hoping that this will not happen in a year or two, but that is going to be a question that we're going to talk with Verizon. We're going to leave that kind of in Verizon's ball game, because we're not prepared to answer that. It's going to kind of depend on where they head with the service. And of course, we want to work with the contractor to make sure that they are implementing a radio that's going to be most up to date, that we're not talking about this in a year as well. So,
how long have they operated on this 3G?
Yeah,
Like 10 years.
It's been
so
about
they've
10
been.
years since
So hopefully, they won't make a major change for a few years. So, all right. Are there any more?
John, yeah.
Yes.
How often are the call boxes used?
we still have, this is something exciting for me. I always go to the state meetings, and I'm always excited to tell them that we're still getting usage, and nobody seems to care because they're not really focused on that anymore. But for us, we still have over an average of 1 call per day on our system. Yeah. And that's still really good. If, you know, figuring out how many call boxes we have, if that's, Phil will always tell me this, if you're that one stranded mom with 3 kids in a car at 9 o'clock at night, and you're going to be that one phone call, it is going to matter to you. And so we still get quite a few calls, especially coming along Highway 20, all the way through both counties. Highway 20 is heavily used.
Yeah, and we do collect data on usage, so we know which boxes are getting the most usage.
And along Highway 20, are those satellite phones?
They are, some are and some aren't. There are still quite a few cellular on Highway 20, but when you get more into the redwoods traveling towards the coast, we have deployed some satellites out there as well. We do, the one thing that we still battle, and there's probably not going to be any ever fix for this, is some of the redwood trees still block our sunshine, so the batteries will die, and there's some areas that we can't reach because of the redwoods. But we've pretty much gotten Highway 20 covered. 128, there's a little bit of a break because the redwoods are pretty thick out there, but for the most part.
Any other questions?
Oh, one more question.
Mm-hmm.
There's no mandate from the state to have the call boxes, or at any distance, or the number of them, or for the number of miles of roads we have?
Isn't it voluntary to
There's
form a safe agency?
guidance, but
Yes.
we have never even come close to reaching the minimum threshold. You know, we've done more of a, as Lexi was saying, looking at areas of county that are dead zones with 0 cell service, or.
So we can't hear you on the recording if you're sitting there. You have to get to the mic. Sorry.
I'm Lisa Davy Bates with MCOG Planning, and I was mentioning that there are areas, you know, in our guidance, the safe guidance, that say, I think down to, in some areas in the cities, they would get down to 1/4 mile, but that was in, you know, the times where we didn't have good cell phone service. So for us in Lake and Mendocino counties, we are focusing on areas of the county that still don't have good cell phone reception, and so you mentioned Highway 20. That's, you know, an area that has more call boxes, especially between 53 and Colusa County. There's quite a few. Along Highway 1, which is also an area where we have quite a lot of satellite boxes on Highway 1. But we've never met that threshold because we don't have the funding. They mentioned earlier in the report that we collect in Mendocino and Lake counties $1 per registered vehicle per year. So as you can see, that's not a whole lot of money to maintain the program. So we have to sort of balance our budget on, what can we afford to install, because once they are installed, we have to maintain them. So with that, and the satellite boxes are much more expensive to not only get the service for the cell service, but also the maintenance and installation of the program. So that's kind of the situation we're in there.
All right.
And there are some counties that completely opt out of the SAFE program. So Colusa County, for instance, does not have a SAFE program. All right, any other questions before we move on?
Yes, I have a question. Depending on how many of these cell phone boxes we have to replace, where would we get the funds?
So the program, the entire SAFE program is funded through the $1 per year vehicle registration fee. So that continues to come in, and that is what would fund replacement of the radios.
So it could take some time, like a couple of years, to replace all the ones we might need to.
Depending, and at this point, because we really don't have a clear picture of how many we will actually have to replace, or if we replace them, if they will in fact work, we don't know if it's something that we could do in 1 year, or if it would have to be spread over a couple of years, in which case we would take a look at the most critical areas and prioritize those, or change our spacing, from every mile to every 2 miles, maybe every other call box would be out of service temporarily, and so we would replace every other. And when they are out of service, they get they get bagged, so they get this big bag over them, so it's clear to the traveling public that those boxes are not operable.
Okay, who does the maintenance on them?
Did you mention the SAFE plan? We have a strategic plan. You did in the overview. Yeah.
It's
So that's where-
case systems.
Okay, do they go out and cut the brush around them so that they aren't totally overgrown?
Oh, the actual maintenance, we
Yeah.
actually do it in-house. So they'll go out and Phil has done it a couple times, James has done it a couple times.
Okay.
There's been times where we have a maintenance permit with Caltrans to go out, make sure that the weed eating is done around, there's a couple famous boxes on 162 that are really famous for having some rattlesnakes. So make sure that they're really cleared spring, and kind of make sure that they're easy to get their usage and not have to climb through weeds and poison oak and everything else. So.
Okay, I just wanted to know who did that. Thank you.
Any
Okay.
other questions? All right.
Guess not. So it looks like we should recess as the SAFE and reconvene as the Regional Transportation Planning Agency, immediately recess as the Regional Transportation Planning Agency, and reconvene as the Policy Advisory Committee. I don't think you need to do the roll again, do you?
No.
So we'll go to public expression. Do we have any members of the public who'd like to address the board? Okay. Then we'll go on to regular calendar, number 8, Executive Committee recommendations from February 20th.
I'll take this one. So this is just a preview of this upcoming next fiscal year's budget for 2019-20. We had an executive committee meeting. It's like 3 of you were there with us at that meeting to look at staff's initial draft. So what you have in your packet is just kind of the first step. We've got this single-page spreadsheet. It's kind of a summary of all the funding sources. The main thing we were concerned with at this stage is the sales tax revenues, the local transportation funds. So the county auditor is required under the Transportation Development Act, again, to provide us an estimate of those funds. So it's running pretty high right now. It's very encouraging, actually. You know, I've written my report based on the numbers I've been given and that we're seeing, and I haven't done any economic studies. It seems, you know, almost a little too good to be true, but it is running higher. Maybe finally some economic recovery is catching up to us around here. So it's looking good. We're getting close to 4 million. We're at $3.85 million for the auditor's estimate, 3,852,643. And that's in my staff report here, and then this very top first column in this spreadsheet. So that's about as high as we've seen it. Is higher than the rate of inflation. We use the California Consumer Price Index, the CPI, to track the inflation rate, and so looking back at the past actual closed years, and we get that from the State Department of Finance. So that's just for reference, really. That's the overall picture, is that we have a pretty high fund estimate, and in addition to that, we have an excess, call it excess revenue or unrestricted balance from the prior audited year, 2017-18. That's about $375,000. $378,614. It's a pretty high number left over from the last audit year. And so that flows into our reserve, and the reserve is set at 5% of the new auditor's estimate. That's $193,000, and whatever's left over goes into this new year's budget. So we have a little windfall there of $375,000 going into the budget. So that's good news. Just stepping down through my written report, we have a small reserve at $29,000. Just leaving that alone for now until maybe there's some identified need for that. That was a result of going to the accrual method, and we've been talking about that for the last year or two. That's the remainder of that accrual process. So what else do I need to talk about here? So that's the revenue side of the local transportation funds. And on the allocations, administration comes right off the top under TDA, Transportation Development Act. We have a kind of a placeholder number in there right now because the 5-year staffing contracts will expire on September 30th of this year. And so we're going to be talking about that more on the agenda here. But that exact number of those staffing contracts is unknown at this point. So staff proposed a 5% increase as a placeholder, and it may come in less than that. In any case, we have a number for administration of everything in here of $464,066. So that is including not just the staffing contract, but also the direct costs that we have available for things like the outside auditors, some travel, our memberships, and these kinds of things. And that's running about $50,000. So bear in mind that is a draft number for administration. And electing to do the optional 2% bike and pedestrian program, and that comes to $67,772. We talked about that in the orientation a little bit. The next thing down in the allocation priorities is the planning program, and those are just the local funds. There are other state funds that come into the planning program, as Loretta talked about. And that is at $147,816, and that is the same amount as last year. There's no increase proposed. And finally, the balance is available for public transit, so for MTA to claim. And that is $3,548,623. So $3.5 million, that's an increase of 12.5%. And the reason that percentage is so high is we had that unrestricted balance from 1 year back, the audited year, that was running so high. So that, along with the increase in the sales tax estimate, is giving us a nice high number for transit this year. So the other things that you see on this sheet are, well, if you're looking at this spreadsheet here, each of these columns is a major funding source. I've just talked about the local transportation fund, just the sales tax revenues alone. The other funding sources going across the sheet, you have your state transit assistance. That is for Mendocino Transit Authority to claim, and that is up a lot. And the reason for that is Senate Bill 1, the Road Repair and Accountability Act, passed a year or so ago, 2017. And that is infusing a lot of transit funding. So that State Transit Assistance Fund had been kind of shaky there. It was starting to really decline year by year by year, and I can't explain to you how they come up with that formula. It's very complicated. There's a pretty complex flow chart that goes into that at the state level. It comes from gas taxes originally. But in any case, that has gone from about $350,000 a year. We're looking at almost $950,000 this year. That's the state controller's preliminary estimate. That's looking very good. Plus, we have some of those funds still sitting in our account that have not been claimed yet by MTA. And we've got $1.4 million of that funding source alone for MTA to claim. They can do a lot with that. They can do capital purposes or operations. And then the next one over is the Capital Reserve Fund. And that is up only because MTA chose last year, when they were in this current fiscal year we're in now, to put some money into that. They have that option. They can put some of the money that MCOG allocates to it into that capital reserve and save it for 5 years. So that's what they've done. They've doubled the size of this last year. So we're really just basically carrying forward what we already had. The rest of the funds marching across here are going into the planning program mostly. You've got the planning, programming, and monitoring. That's for the state. It's a portion of the state transportation improvement program we just talked about earlier. The rural planning assistance and the grants. In this particular draft, this is a very early draft. This does not include funds carried over from the current year, multi-year projects, and funds that aren't spent in this year. So this number for the planning program, I've got a total of $905,000 here. That's going to go up more than likely. It's usually running more like $1.5 million. So when I'm looking at this grants column, I'm taking Loretta's numbers here, so whatever she tells me goes in here. Your technical advisory committee is going to be, has actually looked at this first draft too and recommended. The grants are grants that have been applied for under the Active Transportation Program. We don't have those yet. We're waiting to hear, I think, in April. But there are existing grants that we have the money that are projects that are going on right now, and more than likely we'll see carryover in that. Under federal, we have the Regional Service Transportation Program, $780,000. That's running a little high, but in my experience, it's probably going to come in a little lower than that. But all in all, we have $8 million to work with here in revenues. That's as high as I've ever seen it. So we're doing pretty well. You know, the voters decided to fund transportation this past year, and the economy's up a bit. So That's looking good. The allocations so far proposed are for our agency work, the administration, the bike and ped grants, and the planning program, and that's $1.5 million. 1,527,215. That's the total here, and then the remainder is all open for transit, with the exception of the regional service transportation program that we expect to allocate in the usual manner of. 100,000 off the top for the partnership programs, the formula allocation for the cities and county, and then that small amount for the staffing position. So are there any questions on that? This is just meant to be a preview. We're going to continue working through committees. The next committee to look at this would be the Transit Productivity Committee. Hasn't the, Loretta, the technical advisors already weighed in on the draft planning program? That's right. So you've got your executive committees looked at this. The technical advisory committees looked at the planning program, recommended some numbers here, and finally the transit committee will look at what MTA claims, and their claim is due on April 1st. So we're a little ways in. This is an early draft, and we will be, after we get through some committee work, we'll be coming back in May with a budget workshop where we can delve into the numbers a little more.
Okay, thanks. Just as a reminder, Supervisor Hashak and I have a meeting at 4 o'clock.
Oh.
So.
Okay.
Okay, that's really all I have, unless there are questions. And you've got my written report. You can refer to that.
Anything you want to?
I have a question. I'm just trying to figure out the spreadsheet, and when I see the total revenues at 8,012,000, basically,
Yeah.
and then the total admin, bike and ped, and planning is at 1.5 million, and so the balance available for transit is 5.7 million. And so you know, the way I look at it, shouldn't the total revenues minus the total admin, bike ped, and planning be that difference should be the balance available for transit? Do you see where I am?
Yeah, I think he's missing the allocations.
Yeah, the difference is way at the bottom. We have the Regional Service Transportation Program, and
Right. Some of those revenues include money that the RSTP funding that goes directly to the cities and counties that you were actually asking about earlier. So that's money that's not available for transit because it is for other purposes.
Yeah, right.
And then like the money that is identified in the work program, that includes grant money or grant money that is for specific purposes. So, so the total revenues it includes some funding that's not available for transit purposes.
Right.
Oh.
Yeah, we're carrying over several funds across this sheet, so they have access to a certain number of those and not others.
Okay, so it's
Yeah.
really the total revenue minus the total allocations gets you to the 5,765,000, right? Okay.
And that's coming out of the local transportation funds, the state transit assistance, and the capital reserve fund. That's what MTA can claim. Yeah, I hope this will make more sense over time. You know, I developed this out into a document that's got notes, it's got narrative, and allocating resolutions. In the end, you're going to come up, you're going to get this. It's offered electronically too, of course, but it breaks down all these things to hopefully make more sense. And we do develop out all those numbers so that it's pretty transparent in the end.
Yeah, so when this comes back in May, this is this current fiscal year's budget, but this one-page spreadsheet that Janet has included today There's an expanded version of it that you'll get in May that is a three-page small print spreadsheet. So
Well,
you get a lot more breakdown and detail about each of the revenue sources and allocations.
and that'll compare to the previous year, and it'll give some side notes. There's a document about the notes on the different kinds of funding sources, and mainly what's going to be in this is the allocating resolutions and all the exhibits that go to that. It's going to break everything down. You're going to see everything that we're talking about in there. So come May, you're going to have to sit through my full-scale presentation on the budget, and that'll be kind of an open workshop format so that we can, ask all the questions you want. We'll get to the bottom of that. So, but I'm very encouraged by these numbers. I hope materializes. We're doing well so far. We try to be careful with our money and try to allocate it wisely. So the initial projections are good. They're coming. The county auditor looks at the first 7 months of actual revenue this year compared with the same 7 months a year ago, and he works off of that to try to get close to what the actuals can be expected. And then the rest of these are from the state controller. They're, these are professionals that bring us these estimates. I hope they're right.
Okay, we have a follow-up on the SAFE, which is item 8B.
Yes. I'll try to make it brief. You already had a lot of background information on the SAFE. So similar to MCOG's, other responsibilities, administration and planning functions for SAFE are separate functions. The annual funding for SAFE planning and operations is identified in an exhibit to the MCOG budget resolution, which is attached to your staff report. The amount that it was included in that exhibit D for this current fiscal year 18-19 was pulled from the 5-year implementation and fiscal plan for SAFE, which is the plan I mentioned. We're now in the last year. At the time that plan was developed, the vision had been that planning for the SAFE system would wrap up in fiscal year 17-18. However, we had two things have now affected that. So we didn't plan for planning in fiscal year 18-19. Two things have affected that. One, we had staffing changes in 17-18, which meant that the progress that we expected in 17-18 didn't necessarily happen, and so that's reflected in some of the savings, the cost savings that are mentioned in my staff report. The other factor, of course, is the need to plan for the upcoming changes to the cellular network that our systems run on. Another factor driving the need for this proposed budget amendment is for consistency with the contract with Davy Bates Consulting to provide those the SAFE planning services. So we have proposed a budget amendment. This was considered by the executive committee at their February 20th meeting, and they did recommend approval. At that time, the amount that was used was a round number of $17,000. However, we have refined that number and would recommend the amount of $16,262. If this budget amendment is approved, this is something that would be billed by the contractor for actual hours worked. So it'll be billed just for what's done and reimbursed. So as I mentioned, the executive committee did recommend approval of the budget amendment, changing Exhibit D of Budget Resolution M 2019-03, which is attached. The Executive Committee recommended adding the amount of $17,000, but we would suggest the refined amount of $16,262. And the language that would be added to Exhibit D is included in your attachments, but it reads, safe planning staff costs shall be billed on a monthly reimbursable basis for actual hours worked at the attached fully weighted hourly rates. Total approved funding for safe planning and operations in fiscal year 18-19 is $16,262. Are there any questions?
Would someone like to make a motion?
Will move to approve the proposed budget amendment to allow for the safe planning and operations.
Second.
Great, thank you.
Okay, any public comment? No one's rushing with the microphone? Any board comment?
Can I just check to make sure that Rex is still with us on the phone?
I am on the phone.
Okay, thank you. I haven't heard your voice in a while,
He's
so
not asleep.
making sure. Just wanted to double check. Thank you.
He's not anymore.
Yes.
All right.
Okay, roll call because we have a
It's
vote
funding.
on the phone.
Right. Okay. So Brown,
Yes.
Stransky,
Yes.
Wasserman, Carter,
Yes?
Koscheck,
Yes.
Jackman,
Yes.
and Chair Judy.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Hello.
Oh,
I am so sorry. And Alvin Smith.
Yes.
Thank you. So sorry.
Okay, now we're at item 8C, which is approval of selected options for comprehensive staffing services starting October 1, 2019.
all right. So this is another item to come out of the executive committee. So as mentioned in the orientation at the beginning of the meeting, staffing services for MCOG are provided by contract. Contract for the administrative and fiscal services is provided by Down Associates, and planning services is provided by Davy Bates Consulting. These functions were separated in 2014, and at that time, competitive procurement process was conducted with a full request for proposals, and then ultimately the contracts were awarded with the for an initial 5-year term with up to the option for up to 5 1-year extensions. So the current initial 5-year term will end on September 30th of this year. So the executive committee considered options available for staffing after that date at their February 20th meeting. So there are 3 basic options available to MCOG for continued staffing. One option is to exercise the option to extend the existing contracts. A second option is to go through another procurement process, including a request for proposals and seek new proposals. And then a third option would be to convert to a public employee model rather than using contractors. So at their meeting, the executive committee considered these options, and they voted to recommend to the MCOG board that they exercise the options for contract extensions. Additionally, they recommended that the MCOG board appoint an ad hoc committee to work with the contractors and negotiate contract extensions. So today, these options are presented to you with the executive committee's recommendation, and we ask that the board select a preferred approach at this time. Ultimately, any outcome, any sort of contract would come back to the board. I do also want to note that today is not not an opportunity to get into any sort of negotiation. And also, if the board members want to have a discussion of pros and cons of any of these options, because we are the contractors, I would ask that the chair handle that part of the conversation so that we are not participating in that part of the conversation. So that's my staff report, and you have the executive committee's recommendation.
Okay. Director Hashak, did you have a comment or question? No. Oh.
I move the recommended action by the executive committee.
I'll second.
Okay. Any comments? Okay, well, if we do this, we then need to follow up with an ad hoc committee, yeah. Okay. I guess we can make those two separate
So
actions.
I think you could do two separate actions, yes.
Okay, then I make a motion to recommendation 1 of the executive committee.
I will second that recommendation.
Okay.
Probably need roll call.
Do we need to,
Yes.
do we still need to do
We
roll
do,
call?
because it's on regular calendar, so Rex will
Okay.
be voting, yes.
Okay. Brown,
Yes.
Stransky.
Yes.
Wasserman,
Yes.
Carter,
Yes.
Alvin Smith,
Yes.
Haschak,
Yes.
Jackman,
Yes.
Chair Judy.
Yes?
Thank you.
Okay.
And then I will make motion to appoint an ad hoc committee to work with the contractors and negotiate contract sessions.
I will second that also.
Okay. Do we want to name the ad hoc committee? Anyone particularly interested in being on this ad hoc committee? Okay.
Or, I'm interested.
Yeah. Since I was around at the time we did this last time, I should probably be one of the people on the ad hoc committee. We could have up to 3 people on a committee.
I'm available. I'm here in Ukiah, so if you want 3, I'll be the 3rd.
Okay, how about we do that?
Okay. Yeah. Get somebody in between the 2 board of supervisors. In case you guys get in a fight or something like that.
Okay, so, I don't know, do we have, can the chair just appoint an ad hoc?
I do know.
I think so.
Okay, so then we'll
Although
just.
we have a motion on the table, you
Subject to
could vote on it too.
Okay. Well, since we don't have a motion, do you want to just make a motion to nominate the 3 of us?
We could do that,
Yeah.
okay? I'll amend my motion to include that Director Hashak, Jurdy, and Brown be the ad hoc committee.
I will second that.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Brown,
Yes.
Stransky,
Yes.
Wasserman.
Yes.
Carter,
Yes.
Alvin Smith,
Yes.
Haschak,
Yes.
Jackman,
Yes.
and Judy.
Yes. Did you get, oh,
Did we get Tess?
Okay.
Okay. Thank
Okay.
you so
All
much.
right. Thank you.
okay, now we're on to consent, which is approval of minutes. And I just have one very, very tiny correction to the minutes. On page 2, some of the emergency, on the second paragraph, some of the emergency access roads have been identified. They weren't identified by Caltrans. They were just, I'd say, just identified, just strike by Caltrans, or on private property. So if we just strike the words by Caltrans on that second paragraph,
Got it?
that's pretty minor. Does
Okay.
anybody else have any corrections to the minutes? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve the consent calendar?
As amended.
So moved.
I will second.
Okay, as amended. Okay, do we still need to do roll call?
No, I don't believe so. Oh,
Okay.
wait a minute. We have a teleconference.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think
I'm
it's roll
sorry.
call.
The reason is because we have a remote site voting, we have to have a roll
Yes.
call. So Brown,
Yes.
Stransky,
Yes.
Wasserman,
Yes.
Carter,
Yes.
Alvin Smith,
Yes.
Haschak,
Yes.
Jackman,
Yes, I'm still.
yes, so far you are, and Judy.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, now we're going to recess as the Policy Advisory Committee, reconvene as the Regional Transportation Planning Agency. Do we have a motion to ratify the actions of the Policy Advisory Committee? So we're just ratifying what we did as the previous board.
I will move that we ratify the motions.
Second.
Okay, and these, I think we can just do all those in favor.
Yes.
All,
I think, just do a fast roll call. I think it's because we still have someone on.
okay.
Brown,
That'll be the last one.
Yes.
Stransky.
Yes.
Wasserman.
Yes.
Carter,
Yes?
Alvin Smith. Yes. Oschek
Yes.
and Jurdy.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, now we're on to reports, information. Mendocino Transit Authority, I don't think there's anything to report since our last meeting. North Coast Rail Authority, nothing to report. MCOG staff, we have your summary of meetings. Is there anything you want to highlight?
No, I don't need to highlight anything on the summary.
Then you have administration, the California Transportation Forum. I mean, we have your report there, which,
You have my written report. Interesting conference. I like to go to this every year and kind of get the big picture and what's going on. And it's not just transportation. A lot of it is. There's a lot of related issues. And
I'll just note that
Pretty much,
Mr. Heckroth,
yeah.
who you reference,
Yeah.
he's a former Caltrans executive who I think is one of the leaders of that organization.
Yes.
He has both a son and a daughter in Mendocino County. The son has developed electric tractors, and his daughter is director of Mendocino Area Parks Administration Association.
so we have a local connection. I like to mention it. He's still showing up at these forums and has a lot to say. So that was an interesting note. And a lot of this is futuristic, seems futuristic, but it's actually happening. You know, some of these, boy, a lot of talk about autonomous driverless vehicles and a lot of different modes of getting around that we may not be seeing here in a rural area so much. But these things are really happening already. So I thought it was kind of interesting that in San Francisco, they have those electric scooters, not the kind you stand up, you know, there's nice, you sit down and like a little moped and 3,000 rides a day they're doing in the city. So, you know, as far as getting people out of their cars and, you know, reducing congestion and improving air quality, there are ways to do that. They're working on it. So that's interesting. And then, you know, there was a lot of talk about, you know, the state of Caltrans. The Caltrans director was there on how they're doing statewide, and then talk about, you know, the recently passed Road Repair and Accountability Act and working to protect that in the legislature as being a very high priority. So those are some of the things that I heard from this illustrious group that day. So I just wanted to share that.
Does administration staff have any other miscellaneous reports?
I do have one item. So last week I received a request from the RTPA director in Del Norte County asking for a letter of support for a funding request that they are making to the that they in partnership with Caltrans are making to the California Transportation Commission for $40 million on the Last Chance Grade project. This is a stretch of 101 between Klamath and Crescent City. It is consistently closed due to slides and is in danger of permanent closure. So they are, it's a major undertaking to find a permanent solution for this stretch of highway. It was actually just last week the highway was closed, and unfortunately a closure of that highway, particularly a permanent closure, means approximately 320-mile detour for residents of the area. So it is a significant problem. So unless the board has any major objection, I will be providing a letter of support for that project in Del Norte County. The other counties in the North, Del Norte is part of the North State Super Region, as are we. Other counties have been supportive of large projects in our area, and so I feel it is appropriate to extend that support in return. So,
What is the plan for this road?
Is it the environmental document that
So
comes
yeah,
out?
so this $40 million is for project development, and through that process, they will identify what their plan is. So I don't know because it's sliding
Into the ocean?
Yes, into the ocean. And so I don't know if they are looking, if they will ultimately choose something, on that, at that same, on the same alignment to permanently restore, or they would have to consider rerouting the highway. But that's something that they'll be exploring in project development.
Such as a bridge or?
Could be something like that,
I think
or,
a boat would come in handy.
A boat.
A ferry.
Ferries. Sure. This stretch of highway, they actually provided some information on the cost of maintenance for this last transgrade over the last 9 years. Since 2010, they've spent $56 million in federal emergency relief funding on that stretch of highway because it just continually is failing.
So I think the problems aren't quite as severe, but maybe not such a distant second. But I mean, north in the Leggett area, Piercy area on 101, it keeps sliding out. And I know Caltrans has put a tremendous amount of effort into that, not to mention the 2 bridges in that general area. But I've been actually just surprised at how often it keeps failing in that area. So I don't know if you've heard of Caltrans looking at like a planning project for that.
I don't know, and I don't know if something in that area, and the bridges there are plans for. I don't know if you remember me mentioning the amount of SHOP money that's planned to be spent in Mendocino County over the next 10 years. It's over $1 billion, and part of that is the bridges. But I don't know if there's something specifically planned in that area to correct that problem, and I don't know, we had the list of
Probably
Caltrans.
101 between Willits and
I
Okay.
have a hard time following the details. If you could repeat the specific location you're asking about, I might have an answer.
So Rex, I was talking about the the rock slides that come down onto 101 north of Leggett that have repeatedly closed off the road or made the road down to 1 lane for extended periods of time.
with the nets.
Right at Cummings there.
Right. I'm not aware of anything we're planning on doing, since the Confusion Hill bypass was constructed. It's had, the closures have been much less significant. I know that the most recent extended closure was caused by a fuel truck that crashed in that area.
Okay.
So is that, we can look into that for the next meeting, if you're interested.
Yeah, I might be able to, look into the specific question if I can get it into a little more detail.
I think there was a closure maybe last weekend due to another slide.
All right. Well, Rex, I'll pass the question along to you, and then maybe you can bring some information back at the next meeting.
Yeah, that sounds good.
All right.
That'd be helpful.
Thank you.
One of the things Caltrans been talking about is climate resilience, and as I highlighted in my report from the forum, they're doing vulnerability assessments all around the state in all their districts. And, some of this are from, heavy storm damage and all the other things, fires too. So this is not the first time we've heard about this. Some of the, I think 2 years ago, the Caltrans planning conference had a whole session on this, whether, you know, from sea level rise, if you're gonna have to, you know, harden structures or move them inland or something, but definitely this is getting attention these days. So I'm working on it.
Okay, thanks. So now we're on to planning staff.
I don't think we have any planning staff reports.
Okay. MCOG directors, any director reports? CALCOG?
We have a CALCOG meeting next month. And
I'm going.
Janet,
This month.
Janet and I
Yeah.
are going to go.
And Lisa Davy Bates, so the three of us are going.
Ah, great.
Yeah.
If we can get there.
If it's not snowed in.
My only question is there some input that we're supposed to bring with us, or we're there to attend an informational presentation?
It's more of a learning experience, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But,
Would you
you know,
agree?
every year that, I don't go every year, I've gone every third year, but especially since Bill Higgins has been the director, I would say that he brings in a really diverse mix of speakers, so I think you'll come back with some interesting ideas of what they're doing in other places.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, well, then we're adjourned at 3:50.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, I will follow up.
All right, thank you, Rex.